15 minutes before. Okay,
Yeah.
Okay, this week's Sedra is Parshas Pinchas, and toward the end of Parshas Pinchas, the Gemara discusses the various korbanos, the various sacrifices that would be given on behalf of the Jewish people. It starts off with the korban tamid, the sacrifice that was given every day. But then there were special korban musafim, additional sacrifices that were given to commemorate the different holidays, different days. And the first one is Shabbos, and then is Rosh Chodesh, and then is Pesach, and then is Shavuos, and then is Sukkot, and then is Shmini Atzeres. So there were additional korbanos given on each day. Now, the Torah begins, as I mentioned, by first mentioning the korban, the sacrifice that was given every day. And one lamb was given in the morning, and one lamb was given in the afternoon. And those correspond with Tfilas Shacharis, with the davening in the morning, and the davening in the afternoon, Tfilas Mincha. And then it goes on to say Shabbos, and then the Rosh Chodesh, the special sacrifices that were given on Rosh Chodesh, Pesach, Pesach, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres. And in regard to each of these days in which the korbanos were given, or these periods of times that required korbanos, the Torah employs the expression of the hikraftem, you shall sacrifice, or takrivu, you shall sacrifice, you shall give a korban, a sacrifice. There are two exceptions. One exception is in regard to Rosh Hashanah. Instead of saying v'hikraftem, it says v'asisem, you shall make. And the Mefarshim, the commentaries, give many explanations why Rosh Hashanah. The Torah employs a different expression. Most of them say, maybe Rosh Hashanah time, I'll go into it more at length, that on Rosh Hashanah, in a certain sense, emphasizes the idea that man becomes the korban. They say, V'asisem, you shall make yourself the korban to a certain degree. Rosh Hashanah is linked with the idea that the sacrifice we give on the Mizbeach, on the altar, is really in place of giving oneself over to God. We have Rosh Hashanah is identified with the Akedah, with the binding of Isaac, who in place of Isaac, a ram was placed on the altar. So that's how many of the commentaries explain the Vasisem as opposed to the Hikraftem. However, there is a question raised. I don't remember where I saw this question. But it's Shabbos also. The Torah does not say v'hikraftem. In regard to the special sacrifice of Shabbos, the Torah says, U'b'yom HaShabbos, on the Sabbath day, shnei kvasim b'nei shana, 2 lambs in their first year, tamimim, complete, okay. So, and it doesn't say v'hikraftem, and you shall sacrifice. It doesn't say takrivu, and you shall sacrifice, like it mentions by the additional sacrifices of all the other special days. And the question is, why doesn't the Torah mention it in regard to the sacrifice of Shabbos? Now, Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, as well, and from the Riva, it also appears that way. They explain it very simply. They say the sacrifice of Shabbos is linked to the sacrifice that was given every day. And in regard to the sacrifice of every day, it says, Lahakrivli, you shall sacrifice to me, Asher takrivu, that you shall sacrifice to God. So the word sacrifice, even though not mentioned explicitly in regard to Shabbos, is mentioned a number of times. In regard to the sacrifice, the Karban Tamid, the special sacrifice that was given every day of the year. And after that, we're told about the sacrifice of Shabbos. So since it's linked, the sacrifice of Shabbos is linked to the sacrifice that was given every year, every day. So the takrivu, you shall sacrifice, is going on Shabbos as well. However, I want to suggest an altogether a different approach. Now, there is another question. Tosfos in Gemara Megillah points out, Yontif, when Yontif, we have Kriyas Torah. We read from the Torah every Yontif, and like every Shabbos, we have a maftir. We have an additional aliyah that is coupled with the reading of the Haftorah. But the maftir reads, or the Baal Koreh reads on behalf of the maftir, some psukim from the Torah. Every Shabbos, when we do maftir, we repeat the last couple psukim, 3 or 4, usually 4 psukim, at the end of the Sedra, and that's the maftir. That's the last aliyah, the last person called up to the Torah. And then that person recites the Haftorah. But on Yontif, instead of reading over the last psukim, what we do is we read the psukim from Parshas Pinchas that talks about the sacrifice of that particular Yontif. So the question is, why is it? And Tosfos points out, he first says there is no indication from the Gemara for that custom, but he says that custom is already mentioned in the Gonim, and Tosfos suggests that even though it's not mentioned explicitly in the Talmud, there is a basis in the Talmud for it. Why is it that the maftir of Yontif is reading about the Karban Musaf, the additional sacrifice that was given on that particular holiday? So I would like to explain the reason for this custom. But there is another, but Tosfos, in his Parish on the Torah, the Daskenu Bala Tosfos, he raises another question. And this question is indicated in Tosfos on the Gemara also. The question is, why is it, just like on Yontif, for the maftir, we read the psukim that deal with the sacrifice of the holiday, why don't we read on Shabbos, for the maftir, every Shabbos, the sacrifice of Shabbos? Uviyoma Shabbos shnei kvasim b'nei shana. And Tosfos adds, it's true. There are only 2 psukim, 2 verses, and every aliyah needs at least 3 psukim. So he says we could have used additional psukim that are mentioned in the Torah right beforehand. So I want to suggest a certain answer. Tosfos gives 2 answers. What I say could be used to explain at least one of the answers of Tosfos, and perhaps both answers of Tosfos. Now, there is another question, and that is, it has to do actually with last week's Sedra, Shabbos, well, we read Shabbos. Even the people from Eretz Yisrael read it this past Shabbos. The Torah tells us about Bilham. Bilham was trying to curse the Jewish people. And in his trip to curse the Jewish people, he went with his donkey, and there was a malach, there was an angel in the path, and Bilham did not see the angel, but the malach did see the angel. And because of that, the malach, because of that, the donkey, Bilham's donkey, did not proceed straight on the road. And Bilham, in his fury and his anger against his donkey, he hit the donkey 3 times. And the donkey miraculously spoke to Bilham, and he says, Lama zehi kisani shlosha regalim. Why did you hit me 3 times? And instead of saying shlosha pamim, 3, which is the more literal word for times, it says shlosha regalim, which is another word for times, but the word shlosha regalim usually has reference to the holidays, that the Jewish people would ola l'regel, they would go up to Yerushalayim. So the Baal HaTurim says that the donkey was trying to hint to Bilham that be aware that you are trying to destroy a nation that observes Shlosha Regalim, a nation that is going to go to Yerushalayim 3 times every year, to the temple, to the Beis HaMikdash. The question is, why the emphasis on the fact that they were going to observe Shlosha Regalim? Why didn't the Torah say? Why wasn't the message given over to Bilham? You are trying to destroy a nation that puts on tefillin, a nation that fulfills all the mitzvahs of the Torah. Why was it that the mitzvah of Shlosha Regalim, of going up to Yerushalayim 3 times a year to Jerusalem, to serve God at the Beis HaMikdash in the temple, why was that used as a warning to Bilham to be aware that he's not going to succeed in his task of trying to destroy, to curse the Jewish people? Now, I think in order to answer this question, we should take notice of a dispute, of a machlokes between the Rashbam and Tosfos in Psachim. Now we know there is a mitzvah of making Kiddush. At the beginning of Shabbos, we make Kiddush Friday night, declaring the uniqueness of Shabbos. And then at the end of Shabbos, there's a mitzvah Havdalah, of, in a sense, showing that there is a separation between Shabbos, between the holiness of Shabbos and the regular days of the week. And what is true about Shabbos is also true about Yom Tov. There's a mitzvah of Kiddush at the beginning of a Yom Tov, at the beginning of a holiday. Matter of fact, the first cup of the 4 cups of Pesach is the cup of Kiddush. But it's not only Pesach that we make Kiddush. The Pesach Kiddush has special status, it's true. But we make Kiddush at the beginning, whether it's Rosh Hashanah, obviously Yom Kippur not, Rosh Hashanah, we make Kiddush, Pesach, we make Kiddush Shavuos, we make Kiddush on Sukkot, on Shmini Atzeres, and of course, at the end of the holidays, we have a mitzvah of Havdalah also, of separating between the holy days, the Yom Tovim, the holidays, from the weekdays. But on Shabbos, when we make Havdalah between Shabbos and the weekdays, last night, when you made Havdalah, for some reason, this is not the custom in my family, but that needs a special share in itself. We take psamim, spices, and we smell the spices when we make the Havdalah, and we make a bracha on the smelling of the spices. Or psamim. And the question, so now Havdalah was also made, let's say, when a Yontif comes after Shabbos, so we make Kiddush on the Yontif, but included in the Kiddush is a Havdalah for Shabbos, because Yontif, to a certain degree, is a lower dusha, is a lower sanctity than is a lower sanctity than Shabbos. So when you have Yontif coming immediately after Shabbos, we make Havdalah in the Kiddush. The question is raised, when we make Havdalah in the Kiddush, when Shabbos comes immediately before Yontif, why don't we make psamim? Why don't we take the spices and smell them at the meal? Because it's after Shabbos, the Havdalah after Shabbos. We have to smell the spices. And the Rashbam says, why do we smell the spices in Havdalah after Shabbos? Why is it important to take spices with the Havdalah? And the Rashbam says, because figuratively, Shabbos, everybody has a Neshamah Yisera. Neshamah Yisera can mean, as we'll see later on, it can mean an additional soul, that everybody has an additional soul on Shabbos, or you can mean more of the soul, whatever it is. And when Shabbos is over, that additional soul that you have on Shabbos leaves you. So figuratively, man should become faint from the additional soul of Shabbos leaving him. So he takes the psamim to figuratively revive himself from the pain of losing and the weakness of losing the additional soul of Shabbos. That's why Saturday night, when we make Havdalah, there is a law, a custom to use psamim. So the Rashbam says, well, Yontif, the Jew also has an additional soul. And since the Jew has an additional soul on Yontif, so when Yontif follows Shabbos, He doesn't feel faint anymore. So there is no need for psamim. So Tosfos asks against the Rashbam. He says, if the Jew has an additional soul on Yom Tov also, on the holiday also, so why is it that we make Havdalah after the holiday? We don't use psamim. We only use psamim. We only smell the spices in the Havdalah that we make after Shabbos. But the Havdalah we make after Yom Tov, we don't use psamim. We don't use these spices. Obviously, Yom Tov is different than Shabbos. And obviously, on Yom Tov, there is no additional soul. Since there's no additional soul, so we do not, when Yom Tov is over, we do not have to smell the psamim, because we do not feel faint. We did not lose that additional soul. So I think with something that my uncle said, my uncle did not address this question. With something that my uncle said, we could explain the Rashbam's opinion. And what I think is that the Rashbam's opinion is based, my uncle said, not in regard to the Rashbam, he says, it's brought down in the Rambam that by Shabbos, when a person prepares for Shabbos, there's special actions that manifest itself. It's called Kabbalah Shabbos. Shabbos not only comes, but we receive the Shabbos. And Gemara, the Talmud mentions that certain teachers would go out into the fields with their students to figuratively receive late Friday, to receive the Shabbos, like an honored guest who comes to the house. You go out to greet him before he comes into the house. And it's mentioned that some people used to sit in their seat before Shabbos, all dressed up in their Shabbos clothes, waiting for the Shabbos to come. My grandmother, my father's mother, till I was about 7 years old, we lived in the house together with her. So she was always very much involved, even though she was elderly. My father was the youngest of her children. And even though she was elderly at that time, but she was always very much involved in preparing for Shabbos. And it made no difference if Friday was a long Friday, as it is at this time of the year, or Friday was a short Friday. All day she was working in the preparation for Shabbos. But whether the day was short or the day was long, in the short period before Shabbos, before sunset, she would be all dressed, ready for Shabbos. That was, she didn't go to shul Friday night. All ready for Shabbos. And she would be sitting in her chair, waiting for Shabbos to come. Almost exactly the way the Rambam describes is the ideal way of accepting the Shabbos. Waiting for the Shabbos to come. So my uncle said, but we don't find laws like this in regard to Yontif. There is no law in regard to Yontif that a person has to sit in the seat, all dressed, waiting for the Yontif to come. Of course, there is a special mitzvah, and perhaps even more so than Shabbos, of wearing special clothes. But there's no halacha that you have to wait for the Yontif to come, that you have to go out to greet the Yontif. And in our day, how does it manifest itself, this halacha? We don't sit and wait for Shabbos to come, and we don't run into the fields, but we have Kabbalah Shabbos. We say L'chuna Ranana. We say L'chadodi. In fact, it's mentioned that the L'chadodi originated in Sfas, with Jews going out into the field in the sense to greet the Shabbos. Boi Kala, Boi Kala, Boi Shabbos Malchusa. According to many, Kala here means Kala is the Shabbos bride. But who is the Shabbos bride? The Shabbos bride is the Shekhinah. It's the presence of God. And my uncle said that there is a difference between Shabbos and Yontif. He said, Shabbos, God comes to us. It's our house. We prepare the house for God. But God visits us on Shabbos. So we go out to greet God. On Yontif, he says, we go out to God on Yontif. We go on Yontif and 3 of the Yom Tovim and the 3 Regalim. There's a mitzvah aliyah l'regel. We don't have the Beis HaMikdash today. But when the Beis HaMikdash was in existence, and the Rambam writes that this was one of the purposes of the Beis HaMikdash, all the Jewish people would go up to Yerushalayim, to go up to Jerusalem, and go to the temple. Yontif is dedicated to the idea of us going to God, whereas Shabbos is dedicated to God coming to the Jewish people. And the halacha of Aliyah L'Regel on Yontif is indicative of the essence of Yontif. It's true, there are some Yom Tovim where there is no mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel, but it's indicative of the essence of the sanctity of Yontif. And when we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, we turn our house, Yontif, into the house of God. It ceases to be our house. It becomes the house of God. And we are coming into the domain of God. Shabbos, God comes to our domain. And therefore we have to go out to greet him. Yontif, we go to the domain of God. And I think with this idea that my uncle suggested, we can explain the opinion of the Rashbam. The Rashbam's opinion is that Shabbos, when we make Havdalah, we require psumim. Why do we require psumim? Because we're faint. Because the Neshamah Yisera, the additional soul, left us. But the additional soul leaving us so figuratively, since Shabbos, God comes to us. So Motzei Shabbos, when Shabbos is over, God leaves us. If God leaves us, now what is the Neshamah Yisera? What is the Neshamah? There is a dispute between the Rambam and the Mekubalim. But the accepted opinion is the opinion of the Mekubalim. of those in the mystical tradition of Judaism. Now, I'm going to say a lot of things here that I don't understand. But the Neshamah Yisera, the additional soul that a Jew has on Shabbos, is what is the soul? What is the soul of the human being? The soul, when the soul is in me or with me, I'm considered to be alive. And when the soul leaves me and leaves any human being, the person is considered dead. Now, what is the soul? According to the Rambam, the soul was created by God. Like everything else was created by God. But the Mekubalim, those in the mystical tradition of Judaism, they suggest that the soul is chelek Elokai mimal. It's godliness that is bestowed on man. So Shabbos, God comes to us, and it's the godliness that comes to us on Shabbos that becomes the additional soul of man on Shabbos. Yontif, we go to God. Figuratively, if we go to God, we go to that additional soul. So, figuratively, after Yontif, we leave God. Shabbos, after Shabbos, God leaves us. When God leaves us, we feel faint. So we need the psumim figuratively to revive ourselves. But Yontif, when we leave God, if we leave God, we can't say we become faint. So there was no need to institute psumim after Shabbos. There is an extra soul, and that soul is the godliness of man. Is a godliness that is attached to man. But Shabbos, that soul comes to us. Yontif, we go to the soul. Shabbos, when Shabbos is over, that soul leaves us, we become faint. And Yontif, figuratively, we leave that soul, so we do not become faint. Now, years ago, I think about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I mentioned this in the shul, and that time Dr. Kenningsberg was in the shul. Dr. Kenningsberg is one of the experts in Kedushas Levi, in the Chassidus of Rabbi Yitzchak Barditcheva. And he showed me that Rabbi Yitzchak Barditcheva, in the Kedushas Levi, it tries to explain the Rashbam from Tosfos question. And he uses different words, but it was clear to me that Rabbi Yitzchak Barditcheva meant exactly what I said. And as a matter of fact, when I mentioned what my uncle said, and I applied it, I said there's an additional point. Yontif, the Jewish people proclaim Yontif. We say, Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. God sanctifies the Jewish people who sanctify the holiday. Shabbos? It's not the Jewish people who proclaim the Shabbos. It's God who proclaims the Shabbos. Shabbos is the seventh day. But the holiday is dependent upon which day of the calendar the Jewish people declare as the first day of the new month. So it's the same idea. Yontif, the Jew goes to God. That's why we are the ones who proclaim the Yontif. We proclaim the holiday. It's not God who makes the holiday. We make the holiday. But Shabbos happens by itself. God is the one who makes Shabbos. So it's indicative of God coming to us. And the Kedushas Levi, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Bardicheva, he says, to explain the Rashbam, he says, Shabbos is mimala lamata. It's from heaven down to earth. And Yom Tov, he says, is mimata lamaila. Yom Tov, it's from earth up to heaven. What's the idea? The idea is Shabbos is from heaven to earth because God comes into our domain on Shabbos. On Yom Tov, we go to God's domain. So with this, we could explain why is it by the korbanos of Shabbos we say uviyom Shabbos. We don't say v'hikraftem and you shall sacrifice, or you shall offer, or you shall give a korban. It's just an and on the Shabbos day. Because the word v'hikraftem, which in Hebrew means you shall sacrifice, comes from the word karov, to come close. V'hikraftem means you shall sacrifice, but it also means, and you shall come close. Because when you give a sacrifice, you come close to God. On Yom Tov, we say v'hikraftem because Yom Tov we go to God. But on Shabbos, God comes to us. It's not v'hikraftem. So that's why we could suggest there is a difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. That's why v'hikraftem is not mentioned in regard to Shabbos. Now, the question is, why is it that in the maftir of every Yom Tov, of every holiday, we mention the korbanos, the sacrifices of the holiday. But Shabbos, we do not mention the sacrifice of Shabbos. And the question is, why is there a custom that the maftir and Yom Tov is to mention the sacrifices of Parshas Pinchas? But I think in light of what I just said, we could understand it very well. Now, in the old days, we didn't follow a calendar. The Bezdin used to proclaim upon the sighting of the new moon. They would say, Mekudesh, Mekudesh, Mekudesh. They would declare the new month. And the calendar was dependent upon what the Bezdin said. And the Bezdin was acting on behalf of the Jewish people. So, and that's why on Yom Tov we say, Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim, God who sanctifies the Jewish people, who sanctify the times, because it's the Jewish people that declare the new month, and consequently, it's through their declaration which day Yom Tov falls out on. In other words, if they proclaim one day as Rosh Chodesh Nisan is the first day of Nisan, we know on the 15th of Nisan, that is Pesach. If they proclaim another day, a different day, so then Pesach will be a different day. So it's the Jewish people who, in a sense, proclaimed the holiday. But that came to an end. They were no longer able to proclaim the new month, and a calendar was instituted. Now, so the question is, if we have a calendar, so why do we say Mekadesh Yisrael B'Hazmanim? The God who sanctifies the Jewish people and the times. Today, we are not proclaiming the new month. The new month is based on a calendar. So the Ramban says the calendar was the Bezdin proclaimed it for all future generations. But from the Rambam, it seems the calendar was a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It was a law given over at Moshe from Sinai that when there is no High Court of Israel, when there is no Bezdin, so the calendar automatically takes effect. So it's not the Jewish people who proclaim the new month, it's the calendar that decides the new month. And then, why do we say the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh? Rosh Chodesh will be on this and this day. It's not we who are proclaiming the Rosh Chodesh. It's the calendar that's proclaiming it. My uncle said, he answered many questions with it. He says, in essence, when the Bezdin used to proclaim, the court would proclaim Rosh Chodesh, which day was Rosh Chodesh, it wasn't a judicial task, but the Bezdin was acting on behalf of the Jewish people. And in theory, if the Jewish people would reject what the Bezdin did in proclaiming the new month wouldn't take effect. So, so in a sense, the Torah says, "HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim." It's given over to you, to the Jewish people. It's just that the court of Israel acts on behalf of the Jewish people. The court is both judicial and to a certain degree legislative. They represent the Jewish people. And my uncle said, not just, that's true, not only what Bezdin says, but that's true even about the calendar. Yes, there is a calendar, but the Jewish people have to accept the calendar. And if the Jewish people reject the calendar, so in a sense, the calendar will, from the Rambam it appears, would come to an end. It would cease to exist. And how do we demonstrate that we accept the calendar? So one of the ways, and perhaps the main way, my uncle said, is through the observance of Yom Tov. The days that the calendar proclaims as Yom Tov, if we observe those days, so that is acceptance of the calendar. So, and in a sense, when we say Rosh Chodesh shall be on this day, that's also indicative of the fact that we are accepting the calendar. And I think that we could suggest the idea of maftir being using the karbanos, the sacrifices. What is the idea behind the sacrifices? The idea behind the sacrifices is of the Yom Tov is the Jews are the active party. We go to God. And as Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Barditcheva said, that emanates from the fact that we proclaim the Yom Tov. We proclaim the holidays. By accepting the calendar, we are proclaiming the holidays. And we accept the calendar through the observance of the Yom Tov. So when it was instituted, whether it was Midiraisa, Midirabbanan, you can talk about it, but when the maftir is korbanos, because the korbanos where it says v'hikraftem, and you shall sacrifice, you shall come close to God. That's an indication that we are accepting these days as a Yom Tov. And it emphasizes the point, the hikraftem, we are going close to God. We take the active role not God. Shabbos, God takes the active role. Yontif, in proclaiming Yontif and accepting Yontif, we take the active role. And that is demonstrated by the korbanos, by the sacrifices of Yontif, where it says, V'hikraftem, and you shall sacrifice. So that's the reason why. That's the reason why on Yontif we read as the maftir, the korbanos. But Shabbos, we don't read about the korban of Shabbos, the sacrifices of Shabbos, because it's not the Jewish people who proclaim the Shabbos. It is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it is God who proclaims the Shabbos. And I think we could suggest, in explaining what Bilham's actions was, Bilham was a haughty person, as I mentioned last week. And he thought of himself as being on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. And consequently, he was very proud of himself. And that's Kina Taiva and Kavod Matzina Sodom and Olam. Because of the pride he had in himself, he lost contact with reality. That's why he acted in such a strange way, trying to do things he knew on a certain level were impossible to do. Now, why did Bilham was able to have communication with God? Why did God communicate with Bilham? I mentioned last week that the difference between Moshe Rabbeinu and Bilham was that Moshe Rabbeinu was God's ambassador, Reb Chaim said. Bilham, because there was a special need, there had to be a Navi, a prophet for the nations of the world. But Bilham wasn't on the level of prophecy. He was God's, Reb Chaim said, God's phonograph. He was an object that God used to reveal certain things that had to be revealed. But Bilham saw himself not just because of the need of revelation. He thought it was due to his greatness. So he was very proud of himself. But Bilham's prophecy, his ability to have prophecy, was not natural prophecy. It was unnatural prophecy. And the donkey seeing the malach, seeing the angel, that wasn't natural. The donkey didn't have prophetic ability, but it was necessary for whatever reason at that time to demonstrate something to prophecy. So the donkey saw things that not Bilham and not a regular person could have seen. So when Moshe Rabbeinu, however, was able to communicate to God almost whenever he had a question. So in a sense, Moshe Rabbeinu, he would go to God. But not only Moshe Rabbeinu would go to God. The Das Kenim Ibalatosva says that it says God appeared to Bilham, and to Moshe it says God called Moshe. Why is it that way? So the Medrash says Bilham was like a person who was suffering from some kind of skin disease, terrible skin disease. And he knocks on the palace of the king, and he says, I want to speak to the king. And the guards run to the king, and they said, that disgusting person is banging on the doors of the palace. He wants to speak to you. And the king says, don't let him in. I'll come to the door to speak to him. In other words, there are times when God comes to us, but God comes to us because of the special relationship he has with us. The Kutzker would say, where does God come? Wherever you let him in. If we let God in as we do Friday night into our house, then God comes to visit us. But there are times when God appears to people who are not deserving of prophecy, but there's a need to give over a message. So God appears to them. But God does not let them come to him. Don't let him in. I'll go to the door to speak to him. And that's the same thing. So the message to Bilham was, Bilham, you're very proud of yourself because God appears to you. And you think that because of that, you will be able to destroy, to curse the Jewish people. Be aware, even the simplest Jew can go to God as indicative of the Shlosha Regolim, the 3 holidays when there was a mitzvah for every Jew to go to the Beis HaMikdash. You, God appears to, and not because of who you are, because you're no better than your donkey, but God appears to you only because of the special necessity. Be aware that the simplest Jew is on a much higher level than you, Bilham, are. Okay.
Okay, thank you. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat box. There are those who make curses against the Jewish people today, like Bilham.
Yeah, okay. God doesn't even appear to them. Okay. That's for sure. Unfortunately, sometimes it's some Jews themselves.
You spoke about that, what, by Yom HaAtzmaut? Or by, yeah. So if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. I think your father said, I didn't hear it from him directly, that the Neshamah Yisera isn't like an additional soul, but it's a super soul. It's like the regular soul.
So there is a machlokis between the Ramban and the Baal HaTurim on that. From the Baal HaTurim, it seems that it's an additional soul because the Baal HaTurim, I was thinking of discussing it, but it would have taken too long. The Baal HaTurim says, he says that the pasuk says, I wrote it down here. One second. Uvayom hashvi shavas vayinafash. If you take the words vayinafash, so the last letter is a shin. Shavas, the last letter is a tuf. Shvi, the last letter is a yud. And uvayom, the last letter, sof tevos, is a mem. Shtayim. So according to the Baal HaTurim, it seems it's really 2 separate souls. However, many say, and I think the Ramban says it, that on the contrary, man has a special soul, but I think that man is more aware, more sensitive to his soul on Shabbos.
What about the opinion that it's the souls who are in Gehenna, but on Shabbos they don't have to be in Gehenna and they come to this world on Shabbos?
That's talking about the people that are dead.
Okay, but those are the additional
people that are alive.
But those are the additional souls that the live people have.
That's right. On the contrary, that's the idea, because the souls, that's the godliness, and in a sense, Shabbos, the godliness comes to man's domain.
So even though they're in Gehenna, but they have a different connection to Hashem than we have.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. There is with the idea of the sensitivity to the godliness. Is that similar to the idea of Kedushas Eretz Yisrael that Rabbi has mentioned?
100%,
That
100%,
sense Hashem more.
100%. It's the same idea. The idea is God is everywhere, but certain places and certain times gives us more a greater sensitivity to the presence of the Shekhinah.
Okay, another question: is the Chelak Elokai considered mamish, or that only to everyone, or only according to the Balatanya?
It's to the best of my knowledge, even it seems to be that all the Mekubalim had that approach, and there were Mekubalim that were not Lubavitchers also.
Even the Vilna Gaon was a Mekubal, right?
Yeah, okay. With the Vilna Gaon, there is a question, because the Vilna Gaon Shita was that God is not in this world; He's outside of the world, and he took Tzimtzum literally. So I don't know how the Vilna Gaon would explain. Well, my guess is the Vilna Gaon would have said that the Neshamah of the person is outside this world, just that there's some kind of connection. But that's just a guess on my part. I don't know.
Mm.
So the Vilna Gaon could have held that the Neshamah is also is godliness, but it does, whereas the Balatanya Shita is the godliness enters man. Reb Chaim Volozhin's Shita is that the godliness is above man, on his head, so to say, whatever that means. The Vilna Gaon might have said that it was outside this world, the godliness, but connected to man. Might have said, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions. Thank you very much. So God willing, everyone, next week will be here at the same time with the same Zoom link, the same code, and hopefully by later today, today's share will be uploaded onto YouTube. So those who want to see it again can, or those who missed it can see it. You can tell them about it. So everyone have a